Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and thank you for allowing us to get the program going in good time. We have the next session going on, and this is going to be a welcome address done by Joshua Au. He is the head Data Center IT Shared Services, ITSS. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand over the fort to Joshua, who will be talking about Green Data Center. Joshua, over to you.
Right, thanks. Joining us today, this afternoon, we have 4 expert speakers for the Green Data Center track. Our first speaker, Mr. Sujit Panda, is CTO at BDX Data Centers, a pan-Asian data center provider with facilities throughout Hong Kong, mainland China, Indonesia, and Singapore. With 2 decades of experience, he has an important message for us how data centers can push the needle in terms of sustainability. Our second speaker, Dr. Seri, is no stranger to us. He's CTO at KoolLogix, a young startup based in Singapore that focuses on delivering energy-saving solutions to cool data centers that will help optimize limited resources while reducing carbon emissions. And today he's going to share how his innovative solution is able to drastically reduce the power consumption of data centers. Our third speaker for the day is Mr. Simon Claringbold, CEO of NaviX Solutions, a subsidiary of Schneider Electric. Simon will be sharing about NaviX's unique business model, which provides critical power and cooling assets as a service and reduces both the costs and complexity involved in running a data center. Our final speaker for today is Mr. Derek William, who is founding partner of TW International Counsel. Derek is a respected expert in the area of data center cooling, and many of us are his students who have taken the DCD data center cooling course that he conducts. Derek has also been instrumental in the design and build of several data centers in Singapore. And today he's going to share some insights about both air-cooled and liquid-cooled equipment. And I'm the chair for this track, Joshua, and I must apologize for doing this remotely, as both my family and I are down with COVID, so hence I'm unable to join all of you today. Now, throughout the conference, you have learned how scientists make use of supercomputers to solve the most complex and pressing problems faced by the world. And yet, we also acknowledge that supercomputers must also reside in physical facilities known as data centers. These data centers, in turn, power the way we live, work, and play. But while data centers are essential to our digital economies and to the efforts of the scientific community, we must find a way, and a better way, to reduce the environmental impact of running the 7 million data centers around the world. This track is about reimagining how we can do so. And without further ado, let us move on to the first speaker, Mr. Sujit Panda, please.
I hope I'm audible. Thank you, Joshua. Really appreciate the fact that, even with this COVID situation, even within the pandemic, you kind of taking the effort to still lead the entire event. And this is like something that I've seen that a lot of people would have withdrawn. Thank you so much for that. Coming back to the topic at hand, sustainability at data centers. I will not spend much time on this piece, about myself. I'm kind of most of the people that are there. I kind of know most of them. So thank you for hosting me and allowing me to speak a little bit about BDX and what are the kind of things that we're doing in Singapore and outside of Singapore in terms of espousing the cause of sustainability. So I'll just take a 10-second on a little bit about BDX. BDX is basically a data center platform, right? And we basically a part of I Square, which is a private equity fund and has got data center platforms across the globe. So we are the Asian platform. We've got a platform in South America, and there is another platform in Europe. So we kind of try to see what are the best practices in each of these geographies and then try to kind of look at what can be picked up from within the community of the platforms. In terms of our customers, we have some marquee names as our customers of the world's largest banks, some of the largest web scale companies that are there in this market, and as also a lot of the financial institutions in the sustainability world are our customers. And in terms of the spread that we have, if you look at it, we're operating approximately around 25 to 28 megawatt. And, we are kind of developing approximately, around 200 megawatt more, 200 to 300 megawatt more. And, we are kind of looking at renewable pieces in terms of under planning is around 80 megawatt. Now, that's a substantial spread. What we have done, right, over the past 12 months is across the platform, we've been able to look at a 36% improvement in our PUE, and that is around, approximately around 23,000, tons of carbon footprint, which has been reduced, right? Now, when I speak about that, please don't take it, in terms of the offset kind of thing, because, we need to look at additionality when I talk about, carbon footprint. And this is what is a specific goal that we have taken of being net zero. And within that, this is a substantial decrease. But does this decrease, is this additional? I would kind of not say that I can use the additionality clause that loosely. I move on to the next one. If I look at the global data center spread, we are looking at a PUE of around 1.5 to 1.6 as being the average PUE of the 7 million number, depending on which report you're looking at. Now, out of this 1.6 kind of PUE that we talk about, I think Asia Pac, is slightly ahead of Africa, right? And from a technology perspective, I think the maturity curve, if I look at it, Asia Pac should have the maturity curve is very high, but the PUE at the same point of time is the same as Middle East or Africa. I would kind of want to see a much better number there than 1.7. So I think what it means is, as a community and as a responsible community, we need to double down and try to see what we can do to get this to, at least a tad below the global benchmark, which is around at 1.6. What we're seeing, I think COP26 has kind of given us a wake-up call. I've been following up sustainability for a very long time, and basis my understanding, we should have picked up this way before, right? And while this is still there in everybody's mind, some of the large corporations have gone ahead and kind of spoken about, they're trying to be net zero, and they're now trying to go beyond net zero to be talking about carbon free, right? So that's where some of the large corporations are speaking about. From a Singapore perspective, obviously, there has been a moratorium on data centers. It's good, bad, ugly. That's not the discussion point, but the discussion point is beyond moratorium, what can be done within the industry, and what can be done to ensure that the current energy efficiency becomes much better than what it is. And how do we kind of look at beyond energy efficiency? How do we kind of look at contributing to the value chain? How do we kind of look at working with the various government stakeholders, non-governmental stakeholders, in bringing in more renewable power and trying to fire up the data center industry, because that has got a trickle-down effect when it comes to job creation, when it comes to the growth of the economy. So we need to kind of look at what is the proactive role that we can play in trying to work with the stakeholders and negate the moratorium in a way that it is a win-win for all of us. So that's I move away from the commentary now to actual work on the ground, right? So if I want to look at what is the key things that is driving sustainability, right? And when I look at the data center industry, and I think the speakers who are there is kind of reflection of what I'm trying to talk about here. You have automation, the increasing use of automation and technology, AI, ML enabled technologies to drive the energy efficiency is something that we all are aware of. And we've seen we've got a subsidiary of Schneider Electric, right? Again, we've got the coolest DC. Now, these are the people who've been driving some of these efforts, right? And glad to be part of the same esteemed panel. But the basic thing is that, we need to kind of adopt this very aggressively. The pace of adoption has to go up substantially, right? The second piece that I look at is, one is that we look at energy efficiency, but what do we do for, even after we have the best efficient ops mechanism, is there anything else that we can do? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is renewable power, right? There is one piece about looking at, buying of offset and RECs. And the other piece is about, buying the real renewable power, right? And making the use hydrogen, for example, has shown us the way, right? There is a lot that can be done even when I speak to experts, and I kind of hear in terms of the fact that, how much constraints are built in terms of Singapore being the availability of land is a bit of a problem. But there is a lot that we can do in terms of importing of the renewable power, and how do we bring in stakeholders together to see how do we grease the situation and ensure that we kind of bring in a lot more renewable power than it is there today, right? So the concept of the regional grid for me is extremely important. And while some of my discussions have been with respect to the grid being to start off with being a little brown and then moving on to be green, but it's a good start. Even if it is going to be brown, it's a good start to look at, and then we will slowly shift to a green grid. And this regional grid looks at the concept of sustainability in the region, right? So as to say, that's the second piece. Now, while you buy, so I kind of at the same point of time want to kind of insist that we have to look at, right, the importance of the circular economy, right? And the reason that I say that is that, while we look at, buying energy, but at the same point of time, how do you kind of get a lot more, a lot more responsibility in terms of how we get this message across to the value chain, right? How do we bring in the concept of, life cycle management of equipment? How do we look at the concept of waste, right? How do we look at the concept of, it's not that we are kind of tearing down the data centers and building all of these green buildings and smart things. That's a great thing to think about, but that's not going to happen today, right? So what can we do to make the best use of what we have, right? How do we look at water usage, for example? So those are the kind of things when I talk about the circular economy. And the way I look at this is that, we have to look at digital as a big way in terms of, how do we take these concepts and make it into a transparent piece of information that can be accessed by anybody and everybody at any point of time, right? So that's the concept of bringing a circular economy which is transparent to all stakeholders. So that way, they message the awareness of what the sustainability efforts that one stakeholder is doing. How does the other stakeholder learn from that? How does the other stakeholder pick that? How does the primary stakeholder incentivize the secondary stakeholder in the value chain to actually be more sustainable? And that is something that needs to be a behavioral pattern that we need to see. I'll just do a small segue into now what are the efforts that we have taken in terms of real things, right? In things of, tangible efforts in trying to make Singapore a digital hub, and at the same point of time, being sustainable in terms of when we talk about a sustainable digital hub, so as to say. So the first piece is the value chain, right? We are sustainable. Sustainable is at the core of our principles, right? But how do we kind of look at taking that to the value chain? So whether it is our customers, whether it is our vendors, how do we kind of look at being able to demonstrate to them that sustainability pays off as an ROI also? So if you look at some of the things that we're trying to do, whether it is procurement, we're trying to do green procurement, whether trying to go to our customers and trying to tell them that, I have invested in a digital tool, and you can at any point of time look at your carbon footprint of the assets that you have in the data center, and it's not going to cost you anything. It's just something that we're doing so that as a customer, you know that you're using this much amount of energy, right, in our data center. So for the customer, it is scope 3, right? For me, what I'm trying to do is scope 2. But the idea of getting this transparently in a real-time manner to the customer is something which is very important for us. What we intend is that the customer should be able to look at their scope 3 emissions by virtue of them using us as a partner in the value chain. And how do we do it? We have an in-house lab. We invested in that. We invested in the AI platform, right? And this platform we call it as 360 view. And the entire idea of this platform is to take the idea of sustainability to a transparent dashboard where my customers, where myself, my stakeholders can actually see the entire scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions for PDX, right? As well as use this as energy efficiency platform. And we'll talk about the energy efficiency a little bit downstream in the slides. But the basic thing is we, over the last 3 years have invested, a huge amount of resources, right? Both in terms of monetary resources as well as, the human resources in terms of building this platform grounds up for the data center industry. The other piece is, trying to say energy efficiency is a great thing to speak about, and I'll try to show the use case of the Singapore data center that we have in terms of how we have reduced our PUE much below our design PUE, and how we have done that. We'll talk about that journey in a little bit. The piece that we are also trying to do is to reach out to our customers and speak about the fact that, if a customer, for example, has got a hardware which needs to be done a refresh, we are kind of more than amenable to go to the customer and fund some of these refreshes so that the customer's carbon footprint goes down. Because if I look at the evolution that is happening in terms of the hardware, right, in terms of the way cooling within the hardware is being done, or airflow within the hardware is being done, there has been a lot of improvements. And if everything goes well, we would want to at least showcase one full data hall to be way beyond the ASHRAE standards, just by doing this hardware refresh, by financing our customers to do a hardware refresh, which can essentially work beyond 40 degrees Celsius. So that's what we're planning to do and showcase to our customers across the globe, saying, hey guys, this is not just about talking about renewable energy. This is not just talking about trying to be energy efficient by using technology to lower the PUE, but also trying to see what is the value chain doing in terms of taking those aspects and then plugging it on to our customers and actually giving them the resources to be able to do it, and then demonstrating what it can do in terms of PUE. And I'll talk about a little bit about this in the upcoming slides, where we will see that not only there's this improved PUE, but how much impact does it have in terms of equivalence, right? From say, for example, forest sequestration. I'll just talk a little bit about that too. So that's what we are currently focused on, and that's what we're delivering in Singapore. I'll go on to the next slide. If you look at what we want to talk about, we want to kind of talk about the big piece is that by 2030, right, we want to be on 100% renewables, right? We want to be kind of looking at doing a lot of these pieces in the journey, starting off with efforts to be energy efficient, and then going on to a PUE, which is way below whatever the regulatory standards or whatever the nudge that the stakeholders are doing us, doing real investments in energy platforms, renewable energy platforms. To 2030, we kind of want to say that, we are a 100% clean energy company, right? We across the value chain, whether it is scope 2, which is 100% clean energy usage, or, across our scope 1 thing, we would endeavor to kind of be absolutely net zero. This is what we believe will make a large impact, and this is what we believe is about not just about marketing, but also about trying to put in real money where our words are. So let's look at let's look at what we're trying to do on the PUE side with our customers. So one of our customers is OVH, which is basically a cloud platform, and by the way, we have permission to be talking about this aspect, right, in terms of from our customer, because what we have done with them is that we're trying to bring in OVH's liquid cooling technology, water cooling technology to the Singapore ecosystem, right, where we are trying to see that how does a technology that one of our customers is using, how do we bring it and use it within Singapore, and demonstrate that by doing this, you can move to, for that particular data hall, you can kind of move to a PUE of approximately 1.1, right? That's what we are trying to do with OVH. Now, what does it mean? That this essentially talks that this particular data hall would need no air conditioning, right? It does not need to be kind of looking at the regular ASHRAE standards, right? So this is one aspect of how we want to bring in cooling technologies, right? The other aspect is in terms of the hardware refresh that we speak about, will come in the ensuing slides. But the basic piece that we're trying to look at is that the bringing this custom hardware, right? At this point of time, it is custom, but when I talk to my colleagues in the OEM industry, I think this is something that can be easily replicated, right? And there's a lot of things that the large OEMs are doing in terms of bringing liquid cooling as not an eccentric or a technology which is available to a few, but something which is commercially available. So that's a reality today, right? And what we see is that this I wouldn't use the word experiment, but this venture that we're trying to do is to demonstrate that you could do liquid cooling on a commercial grade scale. In terms of just giving a brief, right, in terms of OVH, right, it is the #1 cloud company, and what we are seeing is that OVH is investing in Singapore. OVH is looking at doing a large amount of expansion in Singapore, and the reason for this expansion is very, very simple. They're very focused on the fact that Singapore is going to be the place which will actually serve, or the core data center that will serve the edge locations across APAC. So whether it is we've given the name of Australia or India, and the amount of traffic that is actually going out of Singapore is huge, right? This multi-terabit traffic that currently goes out is also being served out of our data center, though that is not on the liquid cooling design. But now the expansion that OVH is intending to do, we want to be completely on liquid cooling. That entire data hall has to be on liquid cooling, and we want to kind of showcase this in terms of the efforts that we've done, is to demonstrate that we are serious, and we want to kind of say that this is commercial grade now. The piece that we are focused on is to kind of look at what else can we do. So we spoke about the value system and the journey that we're taking to be 100% clean. We spoke about some really good cooling technologies. We also spoke about some platform, but have we been able to take that platform to some of our other stakeholders? So yes, so to some of our customers, what we're trying to do is give this platform, as this platform is currently available for free for up to 20 nodes, right? And our customers could start using it just by going to the website and registering themselves. And we pick that up and demonstrate to them that what is your carbon footprint and what is that you need to do to kind of offset that footprint. And this does not cost them money. This is our investment in sustainability. So what is this platform all about? This platform is about, being able to calculate the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Not just calculate, but your scope 2 and some of your scope 1 emissions can be done in an automated manner. This allows your platform to become not just a measurement piece, but also the digital validator in the first mile. What it could do for other industries also is that by virtue of this being the first mile digital validator, you can turn this platform around and use it for industries to look at their carbon inventory, to look at their offset requirements, as also to look at how they can enable the value chain to become more clean. So all of this comes built into the platform. And also the other big aspect is if a large organization wants to go and start getting itself certified for its GHG emissions, right? You have out of the box digital tool which can actually help you do that, right? So that's where the ISO 14064 1, 2, both of these, this digital tool can help you arrive at those certifications. So the big piece about this is that this investment that we've done and built on our own, we are in discussions and we are open for large stakeholders to use this platform without without us making any monetary gains out of this. We kind of trying to do it for specific stakeholders. We're kind of open sourcing this platform. And that's a huge statement because for 3 years of work, there could be substantial monetary benefits that could have come. But that's not the reason that we kind of build this platform. The reason that we kind of build this platform is to become more sustainable. And we don't see any reason that we should not actually go ahead and try to use this as a contribution towards sustainability for the stakeholders within Singapore. I will not talk about the technology piece, but the only piece that I want to kind of pick in here is that this platform allows us to kind of also talk to the power grids. While we have not had much success there in terms of being able to get them to share data with us, but with the structure that we have, what we can do with the power grids is if allowed to, we can demonstrate in a transparent manner as to what percentage of the power grid sorry about this, what percentage of the power grid generation capacity is green, right? And all that they have to do is kind of look at using 360 as a tool. So all of this innovations that we're doing is focused only on one aspect, which is to look at how do we build sustainability. And the last sorry and the piece that I spoke about earlier is that your performance or your power per watt performance has increased has increased on a logarithmic scale, which means that your CPUs are much more efficient than they were there 3 to 5 years back, right? So we're going to customers and talking about the financing scheme that I just spoke about, where we will help them upgrade their hardware to a much more hardened environment as far as their operating temperatures are concerned, and that helps us also because our power consumption goes down, right? Which means that my cost of goods sold goes down, which means my margins get improved, right? But at the same point of time, also helps my customers reduce their carbon footprint. And that's what I call as a win-win game for, and that's what I call is that we should focus on the value chain, right? And BDX is using this as a mechanism to demonstrate that it is serious in what it's talking about. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'll kind of quickly run through the rest of the slides. The other piece is about efficiency by bringing in operational pieces, and you would see that we moved below our design PUE, and our target is to reach somewhere around 1.25, right, as the PUE that we want to reach, probably by 2023. So that's in a way showing that from 1.53 to 1.25. And with a load profile that is continuously increasing, what we have shown is what AI ML can do to kind of transform the way energy efficiency is being used. And there's a bunch of things, and I'm not going to be talking about all of these. I'm going to quickly go through these slides, but the focus on operational efficiency is what has kind of helped us achieve this, and the use of AI ML as a tool to achieve these operational efficiency is what has driven us to reduce our PUE, and like I keep saying, sustainability has side effects, which is it improves your margins. So it's a win-win thing for us. We also are heavily focused on the certification side. So both ISO 50001 and ISO 14064 is something that we're very serious about. We have a bunch of certifications, but on the sustainability side, we're going to be refreshing our BCA Green Mark, and we are undergoing the ISO 50001 and ISO 14064 certifications. And the last slide that I have is more focus on the future, which is to say that how do we kind of look at the greenest data center, right? And we're working with stakeholders, which is NUS and SEMCOP, to look at an ocean data center, right? And we've kind of at the feasibility stage now, and we will very soon move into the full-scale pilot piece, right? The announcement was made sometime last year, right, in September, and we intend to target the phase 1, which is the feasibility piece, by the first quarter of 2022, which for us is by early April. We should be able to announce the full-scale pilot to the community at large. So that's in a very crisp manner is what BDX is doing for the cause of sustainability. And I'm happy to kind of exchange notes with some of our esteemed speakers or some of our esteemed guests and talk about how we can kind of, in a collaborative manner, build a more sustainable planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sujit. We're on to our second presentation, ladies and gentlemen. This, of course, is titled KoolLogix, Green Data Center Cooling Solutions. This will be presented by Chief Technology Officer, KoolLogix Private Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Dr. Seri Lee.
Okay, good afternoon. It is always my pleasure to be here and be able to introduce to you and give you an update on KoolLogix, which is a green data center cooling solutions we came up with in the last 2-3 years. Okay. And my name is Seri, the CTIO of KoolLogix. Okay, first of all, KoolLogix is the name of our product and the cooling solution system. At the same time, the company name is also KoolLogix. It's a startup company. It's about 3.5 years old, spun off out of the ERS, which itself is almost a 40 years old rack company. Okay, but KoolLogix itself is focusing on thermal management solutions for data centers, of course. So the key point, one of the key points I want to highlight about KoolLogix system is the fact that it's run by server waste heat. So it's a thermally induced, gravity-driven system, meaning that it requires no additional input power. Okay, not completely, but later on I'll show you a small amount of input power that we utilize to assist airflow management. In any case, this is again thermally induced gravity system. Technical terminology for that is called the thermal siphon. Some of you might have heard of it. Some of you probably don't want to hear about it. It's a refrigerant system. We use refrigerant as a working fluid, okay, and this it can be configured and integrated to rack and roll cooling system. Okay, and it can also be utilized and extended to localized room cooling system as well. Okay, we have a number of collaboration partners, starting from A-Star all the way to NSCC to ST Engineering. We are focused on joint intellectual endeavors to come up with innovative thermal management solutions to improve energy efficiency and the lower carbon footprint to help achieve ESG goals. Okay, as we all know that the different racks have different power distributions. One of the latest survey indicates that most rack power is around 5 to 7 kilowatts per rack. And there are high performance racks goes beyond the 20 plus kilowatts. So that shows on the left-hand side of the power, the rack density distribution. At the same time, on the right-hand side, it shows the survey result, indicating that most people, as we know, the rack power will continue to increase. So given that situation, we developed the KoolLogix targeting around 20 kilowatts. So it can be utilized in between somewhere around 10 kilowatts to 20 plus kilowatts, depending on the application and the requirements and the arrangement. Okay? So, nominally it's about 20 kilowatt is the design target per rack. Okay, so highlighting the benefits that KoolLogix deliver first is that it takes less space in terms of both floor space as well as height. For example, it doesn't require any raised floor. So it gives you the higher revenue income for the business benefit side, and it consumes almost zero power for cooling, removing heat, so it results in a lower operating expenditure, okay? And that translates obviously to reduce the carbon footprint to hit the ESG goals. And it's modularized and has a flexibility and it provides redundancy. And I want to, spend a few more minutes on that particular aspect later on. Okay. Okay. So how does it work? What does a thermal siphon mean? We probably do recall that what we learned from middle school, I guess, not even high school, was called the water cycle. What I'm trying to say here is that it happens everywhere, including in the nature. And the water cycle, as we all know, the solar energy, the heat coming from the sun, evaporates water from the ground, and that evaporated water, being light, will go up to the atmosphere. And because it's cooler up there, it'll reject the heat into the atmosphere, and it condenses. And when the condensation happens thick enough, it'll precipitate in the form of rain. It falls down by gravity. So this whole thing is gravity-driven, but thermally induced in the beginning. Keep in mind that there's no pump and compressors in the nature. You don't see that outside, right? And that's basically we package this cycle into our hardware. Okay, and that's a CoolLogix. So this is a schematic diagram, of course. And the left-hand side, cool room air goes into the rack, okay, containing a number of servers, and picks up the heat and removes the heat, and the air itself becomes hotter. So it goes into what we call it staging chamber, or trademark name is a cool containment. In that little box behind the racks, okay, the cool containment has a function of mixing the airflow, and then be able to distribute it as necessary into the heat removal module, we call it, which is attached behind the staging chamber. So staging chamber and the HRM, they are combined together and forms a rear door heat exchanger, basically. And through that, the hot air goes through evaporator. That's a rear door heat exchanger. Okay? And it picks up the heat, and the heat is removed by causing the evaporation. Actually, boiling happens in our case, but the boiling is another form of evaporation. So evaporated, and the vapor refrigerant goes up, just like a steam goes up in the nature, and then goes to the RCU, refrigerant condensing unit, away from the white space. Okay? And then it gets to be condensed by losing the heat into the chilled water supply, and then and the liquid refrigerant falls down by gravity, okay, and goes back down to the evaporator, and this cycle goes around. We do have an array of fans attached behind the heat exchanger to assist the airflow through the racks, so we can actually control the actual performance of this heat removal capability. Okay, so looking just briefly a bit more into what's happening in the airflow is that I have shown multiple of racks in a row. Same thing, the cool room air goes in, picks up the heat, and goes through the cool containment, and goes through evaporator, and so on. So if we track the air temperature from left to right in the flow, in the direction of the airflow, the temperature goes in at the cool temperature T in, and the temperature itself rises through the servers. The key point I want to highlight is the fact that different racks can dissipate different power. Okay? Yet cool containment has the ability to be able to mix this flow and distribute into the HRM, and the HRM removes the heat. Therefore, air temperature comes down to the room temperature itself. Okay? So from outside of observer, there's no hot air. Cool air goes in, cool air comes out. So and there's no moving parts other than fans at the behind. So really, outside observers is nothing going on there, which is the beauty of it. No moving parts other than the fans, of course, again. So the reliability and all those things are a given, basically. So this is a three-dimensional the rendering of that particular system. Two rows. In this case, we have a back-front orientation. So cool air goes in from both sides and it comes out through what we used to be called the hot aisle. But remember that we no longer have a hot aisle. Okay? So, okay, with that picture, let's see now. Okay, this is actual hardware. We installed about 2-3 years ago, almost right from the beginning of our inception of the company. We built this thing for the purpose of doing the performance test and all kinds of validation tests. Okay, so you can see that. Actually, I have a little better picture. Okay, so here we have what we call the sharing chamber or cool containment. I want to highlight the functionality of that thing a little bit. The left-hand side, we have shown a typical rear door heat exchanger. As you know, that we need one rear door heat exchanger per each rack. So it's a one-to-one match. Okay? On the other hand, our CoolLogix system also incorporates a cool containment, to which the racks are attached on from one side, and on the other side, we have a heat removal module attached on the other side. Okay? So each HRM is capable of removing about 20 kilowatts. So let's assume that this 10 racks altogether dissipates about 100 kilowatts. Then what we need is only 5 HRMs, not 10 HRMs. So the picture on the right-hand side highlights that blue ones are HRMs, and the gray ones are blanking door. It's just a sheet metal cover, because we don't need it. Okay? In addition to that, we can also add one additional HRM, if and as desired, to be used as a redundant HRM. Okay? So through use of a cool containment, we not only have an opportunity to reduce the CAPEX, but also be able to provide the redundancy. Not only that, actually the racks are shown exactly the same height, but the different heights can be implemented. Okay, so different height of racks can be attached from one side. Of course, the top part can be covered with small blanking plates, by which we have all kinds of design flexibility. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit more examples on that. On the top part is that what if we actually have 200 watt heat dissipation from 10 racks? Then we have no choice but to provide 10 HRMs, as usual. Okay? But keep in mind that it doesn't have to be 20 kilowatt each. The heat dissipation coming from the racks, each rack doesn't have to have exactly 20 kilowatts. It's always the total heat dissipation through the rack, which shares the cool containment together. That's what it counts. Okay, so if the maximum heat dissipation everywhere can be 200 kilowatts, we provide 10 HRMs. But as this is repeating myself, if the entire row dissipates only up to 100 kilowatts, designed maximum, we only need 5 HRMs. And the bottom one is also highlighting the fact that we can have a redundancy and/or have additional heat dissipation capability. So as you can see, that can provide a lot of configuration flexibility and cost-saving opportunities. Now, this is a picture of the latest implementation that we did. As you can see that each rack power dissipation would have been about 5 to 7 kilowatts. But it's not air-cooled anymore. They used HRMs. Only 4 HRMs are shown in this picture is utilized to cool, I think it was like more than 12, 14 the racks. Okay? Of course, the total power is, in this particular picture, is designed to match with the 20 kilowatt HRMs. Okay, so just giving you the update. Lately, we were in the news. I was pleasantly surprised that I wasn't aware that A-Star was have this bulletin article until somebody sent to me. We did a project studying what is actual relative power saving as compared to in-row cooling, which we see that are current traditional competing solutions. To make a long story short, we do have a data and analysis to be able to prove, although it's obviously been optimized, to show that the power consumption can be reduced down to half as compared to in-row cooling solution. If we break into a little bit more detail, during operation, okay, as compared to in-row cooling, the CoolLogix has an opportunity to reduce the power consumption by as much as 80%. Okay. In overall, it's 50%, but during operation, so it's OPEX cost saving. For cooling solution power consumption alone, we have 80% lower power consumption, which, without going through any sophisticated analysis, translates to 80% reduction in carbon footprint. Okay. But during outside of the excluding operation, so this is during the production and the installation and so on, the actual carbon footprint is reduced by about 40%. Okay? This includes recycling at the end of life recycling as well. So in overall, we have about 50% reduction in power consumption and approximately 50% reduction in carbon footprint. Okay? That if we look at that quantity into 1.2 megawatt, the actual carbon footprint saving is equivalent of having 276,000 trees, or about 2/3 of a greenery area in Singapore, or 774 cars removed out of the road. Okay, good. Okay. As compared to indoor cooling, we attach, of course, the heat removal unit behind the racks and arranged in such a way that we can save the floor space, which is real estate, right? As much as up to 30% as compared to indoor cooling solution. This is in addition to the fact that we do not require a raised floor. So it doesn't have to be really a special building. You can actually utilize typical office building and build a data center using that standard building, if you will. Okay. Okay, and I think it was already a couple of months ago. It's one of the, well, it was the largest recognition we achieved so far. We won the Sustainability Award through Emerging Enterprise Award as well. So we had 2 awards recognized. And in conclusion, it's a passive heat removal solution, meaning that it does not require any pump or a compressor. It's designed for high power density data center, 20 kilowatts and above, depending on the situation. It can actually dissipate through measurements. I had about 34 kilowatts, up to 34 kilowatts, depending surrounding conditions and so on. But typically we design for about 20 kilowatts, okay? So high power density, no pump, no compressor, no water in the white space, non-intrusive, therefore it's non-intrusive to the data center itself. That, results in lower PUE and lower total cost of ownership. Okay, so I'm repeating myself. Okay, so that should be good enough for conclusion. And thank you very much. The picture behind it is the latest deployment, which will be completed by about June timeframe. It's in Singapore, but I cannot tell you exactly what it is yet because the announcement is not public yet. But it'll be done, we expect the announcement to be made in around the June timeframe. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you. All right, coming up next, ladies and gentlemen, would be the title in the presentation will be Transforming Data Centers Through Infrastructure as a Service. And presenting this is the Chief Executive Officer of NaviX Solution, Mr. Simon Claringbold.
Great. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having us here today. I'm going to take you through a bit of a journey now. I want to talk about innovation. So we've heard a lot about sustainability. We just heard a great transformational story around how you approach technology and adopt technology. And we've been very focused at NaviX Solutions around how do we innovate and what does that mean within the data center space and also within IT environments in general. And so what I want to do is just spend some time talking about the fact that we know today that globally sustainability in data centers is a critical area. And organizations are working together to try and understand how do they achieve outcomes that are measurable, they can track them, and they have a financial outcome as well. And that's not an easy journey for many organizations because they have a heavy investment in capital already and infrastructure. And we are seeing that a lot of the areas, particularly when you look at power and cooling within a data center environment, are very fixed assets. So the elasticity or flexibility to upgrade and change those assets can be a challenge for organizations. And what we want to do with NaviX Solutions is we want to look at the marketplace. We want to understand what power and cooling contributes to sustainability and going towards net zero carbon emissions. And we want to work with people like KoolLogix around how you can look at new technology and implement that new technology really to drive gains. We want to look at infrastructure that's not as flexible as it used to be to change and adopt, and working through how we do that. And what we've seen is we want to take a very similar approach to the journey that we saw the IT layer go through. Many years ago, everybody managed all of their capabilities on-premise. We then saw a transformation towards infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and ultimately software as a service, where enterprises today make decisions on where they place workload and how they manage that workload in a structured and efficient manner. For us at NaviX Solutions, we took that concept and said, why haven't we and why isn't the industry challenging the way it looks at the OT layer within an environment? Everything from electrical distribution, into cooling, into backup power, into microgrid, and also looking at other technologies that can actually drive transformational change. And so we want to adopt the same key principles across power and cooling that we've seen in the IT layer. Now that challenges a lot of the ways organisations invest today, the way they manage assets, the way that they financially carry those on their books as a cost to operate and as they transform their organisations. We have seen, and we do see, a trend in a marketplace around equipment as a service. So it's not just about taking workloads and applications and putting them in a cloud, but it's also looking at data center environments and IT infrastructure and understanding what is the readiness for customers to adopt a new model. And that model incorporates full lifecycle management. It incorporates driving different financial outcomes for an organisation and linking those towards sustainability outcomes. And we have seen globally year-on-year growth, and we will continue to see that. Asia Pacific in particular is a leader in this area. And so we want to optimise and make sure that we are able to partner but also adopt new trends and look at the way we can transform as we go forward. We look at the way that organisations today address requirements for customers. How do they get applications closer? How do they reduce latency? How do they reduce their footprint? How do they make sure they're optimised? We're seeing that centralised compute for data centre requiring a transition towards edge. And how do you extend your reach from one geography to another with minimal impact but maximum outcome for your customer? And these trends are important because they are transforming industry. And part of what we do at NaviX Solutions is challenge organisations to think differently. And I'll explain that now about what we see as a trend, but also how we see that. To build a new business, we started an incubation in April of 2021. And what we wanted to do is understand how organisations manage their data centres today across a multitude of personas or business owners. Whether that is looking at business leadership, whether that's planning and design, or all the way into operations, to understand what are the steps organisations go through when they're looking at how they optimise their environment. We also wanted to understand what are the challenges when you look at power and cooling infrastructure. And what we found was a consistent list of primary pain points that organisations face today, whether that's around talent and skill gap to understand how you introduce innovation into an environment, whether that is lack of data insight to optimise that environment, whether that is legacy infrastructure that has a long life cycle, 5, 10 years plus, that you can't just rip and replace. You need to go through structured upgrade processes. Multiple vendors in the space. How do you manage those in an efficient and effective way? And then finally, total cost of ownership, return on investment. How do you look at deployment of capital so it is returning to an organisation, and how do you link that then to sustainability outcomes that also are additive to that journey? And to do this, we didn't just focus on data center providers or colo providers, we looked at enterprise customers. So we interviewed over 150 organizations across multiple verticals, from financial services to manufacturing to retail, to understand were there common links as to how they're operating their business today. We wanted to do it globally. We understand Asia Pacific is in a transformation now and will lead the market as we look at data center development. But certainly we wanted to look at other markets such as Europe and the US. And the continuity of the message that came from organizations across these pain points was quite astounding. And so we took that and we looked at how do we build a link? So what is that journey that an organization needs to go through, whether it's adopting new technology and upgrading or expanding existing infrastructure? Whether it's looking at someone like CoolLogix and saying, how do I implement that into my existing legacy infrastructure to get me improvements? How do I plan and design that for today and for tomorrow? And what are the key elements that I need to be mindful of in order to do that efficiently and effectively? All the way through to the build and then operate stage. What's fascinating through that journey, as you can see on this slide, is all of those primary pain points that we just talked about are linked to steps within that journey. And that's across the organization. So it's not with one stakeholder, it's across multiple. As a business leader, as a CTO, as a CEO of a data center, how are you deploying capital? How are you being innovative for not just your environment, but for your customers, as we heard earlier? From planning and design, are we just looking at getting a lower footprint, or are we looking at commercial models that can also help on that journey? The technical aspects of how do we start to do proof of concept? How do we apply new technology in a considered and structured manner so you can start to be transformative? And then from an operations standpoint, what are the tools, what are the applications, and what are you doing with digitalization that's going to help you on that journey? And that's a key area. Many people talk about sustainability today and the challenges that exist when an organization starts to look at net zero carbon emission, aligning that to goals through 2030, 2050. That journey through scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions is always a challenge. And so we want to use applications in partnership with other organizations to help map that journey as well. And so NaviX Solutions was spawned from the innovation of looking at and talking to customers and organizations, so a customer-centric approach to market, to understand how could we address all of these areas in strategic partnership with organizations. We launched officially on the 1st of April of 2021. We're coming up on our anniversary this year. We have seen significant receptivity within not just Singapore, but globally to our business model of providing a true as-a-service platform for power and cooling assets as our first phase. That brings in a few different components for an organization. How do they get to financial agility? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. How do they maximize operational performance? Not just in one site, but across multiple. How then do we take ownership in partnership with them to look at full asset lifecycle management? So that allows a customer to then focus on their core business and allows them to be more efficient and effective. We're about outcomes, joint outcomes, shared risk, but outcomes that help both organizations. We look to go into long-term partnerships over multi-year contracts, given the assets that we're talking about within the power and cooling space. We want to align key strategic initiatives within organizations. We want to make the ability to transform your business easier. Our traditional CapEx budget cycle of budgeting for the year, having outages that were unplanned that you have to then go and put CapEx against. that impacts your overall budget cycle? How do you move into a subscription-based payment model where it's all-inclusive, where you have a strategic partner in NaviX Solutions that will manage the end-to-end process from product selection all the way to decommission and disposable recycle of older aged infrastructure or failed infrastructure. That journey becomes seamless, but in partnership with the customer, and we take full accountability and ownership for that. And it's really changing a lot of things then when you step back and look at what enterprises do today or data centers do today to evaluate how they scale, how do they continue to put capacity in market. It's always on a budget cycle. It's always CapEx oriented. So what we challenge is we don't do CapEx. We only do an OpEx model. We only provide a full end-to-end true as a service model where we give you the option where we can own the asset and provide that as a full maintained life cycle service. We can buy back aged infrastructure and assets that you may have in order to optimize those as well as refresh them over time. So when we look at outcome-based and without being repetitive, it's an important principle that I want to make sure gets across today to the audience. Transformation and innovation comes in many different ways and different formulas. We look at it from starting a journey with power and cooling, given it is one of the largest costs within data center environments today. It's also an area that sometimes isn't optimized, tracked and monitored effectively. So we have really three key pillars to the way that NaviX Solutions partners with organizations in the market. First of all is defining what are the assets that we want to look at within the power and cooling area. And we define those and go through a journey with organizations, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But secondly, we then want to look at the application layer. We are creating what we term the unified digital platform. What is that? That's a conditions-based platform that will provide a single view or a single pane of glass for data centers and for operators to be able to see all of their power and cooling assets in one screen. We can align that then to efficiency and sustainability goals. We can look at optimization of those environments. Many data centers are over-provisioned for backup power. How do we look at the efficiency and utilization ratios so that the organizations know what they're doing both for today and for tomorrow? And that innovation comes from doing two things. One is having an open API approach to market for our unified digital platform. But it's also then about making sure we partner with others that are building capabilities as well. Sustainability and net zero is not a journey you go on by yourself. You have to be able to go on a journey with a collective. And so we want to build an application platform that can leverage the best in market today, bring it into a single view, and be a real working tool for organizations at multiple levels. And then finally, expertise. How do we address the challenges around powering and cooling expertise, particularly when you start to look at innovative technology that's coming out? So we want to be at the forefront of that. We want to have strategic partnerships, but we take full accountability. We want to do proactive services. We want to do proactive maintenance. We want to be preventative around outage. We want to understand trending. We want to use big data to do that. We want to take unstructured data, structure it, and then apply that. And use that then to optimize the operations and how you approach that. So how do we want to go about that journey? We have multiple ways that we engage. We start with either UPS as a service. We can look at IT cooling as a service. We can look at a full powertrain, transformers, switchboard, switchgears, PDUs. We can look at all of that together. We can provide micro data centers as a service. We have an offering to provide prefabricated data centers as a service. And why is as a service important in that? It's not a capital outlay. It's a strategic partnership to build and bring assets into your organization that reduce footprint, bring greater efficiency, but also maximize your return on investment, not just now, but for the future. So when we look at how we want to deploy technology, we talk about scalability. We talk about modular design. We don't want to talk about just building for today. It's building for tomorrow. And then you pay as you use. So a consumption-based pricing model. Isn't that something different to look at? Where we provide an asset where you pay on a monthly basis for what you consume. As you flex up and down off your baseline, you pay more, you pay less. But we're also able then to scale into your organization as you look to grow. And then finally, we're able to wrap all of that with sustainability services. We do it in parallel. That way, when we drive outcome, we're very clear on what we want to do and the journey we want to go on together. So again, as a service isn't about just UPS or cooling, but what we have found is many organizations want to start in one area and expand into others. Why? Because this is a new concept in the power and cooling area, and there is reservations from organizations. And we believe at NaviX Solutions in what we're doing. We look at proof of concept. We have a number of customers that we're currently working with now that we'll be able to announce in the coming months that are going on this journey with us, and they will have great outcomes. And so when you start to look at what you're doing today and challenging the status quo, there's many different places that we can start in the journey. So when we talk to customers, what are we talking about around benefit? There's really 4 key outcomes that we look to drive. The first one is financial agility. Transforming from an upfront heavy CapEx expenditure environment to OpEx. We also then look at asset transfer options. We want to get to an outcome-based model for your UPS. We'll buy them back from you at an agreed residual value. We'll then monitor, maintain those assets as part of the full life cycle and as part of the whole ecosystem. Consumption, as I just mentioned. How do we give you flexibility? How do we scale for today, tomorrow, and the future? And so we want to be able to do that looking at a consumption or pay-as-you-use outcome-based model as well. So it's not just about, here, give me $1 million so I can provide you a new unit. This is about truly transforming the commercial engagement within data centers and IT environments within organizations. And I encourage businesses every time I present to really think about that. How do you take a fixed capital budget that you have, lay it on its side and transform it into OpEx? So instead of buying one unit for $500,000, when you know you have others that could fail or that you need to upgrade, by laying that down, you could upgrade all 3 working with NaviX Solutions. So you're getting a better deployment of capital, you're getting a better return on investment, but outside of the financial, you're getting operational benefit. You're driving sustainability. You're challenging your legacy infrastructure. You're building for today and the future. The second area is technology innovation. KoolLogix just took us through a great discussion there. Liquid cooling. How do we look at new technology and implement that and integrate that as a key component for how we go to market and how we build sustainable data centers in the future? How do we transform legacy data centers to be more sustainable as well? And as I mentioned, it's not just about the fixed asset or the hardware. It's about then the application layer that you're applying to optimize and be efficient. And so for us, we look at technology innovation. We look to partner with organizations. We're happy to do proof of concept. And again, it's outcome-based, so that we do get a true win-win in our engagement models. Operational performance. Many organisations will argue that they need to own the asset. That's fine, you can own the asset under our model. They want to have fully maintain the whole asset if they wanted to. Whereas we'll argue we'll maintain it for you. So in one monthly fee, you pay for the asset, you use it as you need it. There's no hidden fees, there's no break fix, there's no let's renew the maintenance contract in 12 months. It's all inclusive. And that's how much we believe in what we're doing here when we look at full life cycle asset management. And we do challenge the way organisations do it today. Because to go through that, we all know, and those that build and operate these environments or run a P&L, absolutely know that it's always challenging when you go through a process of putting in new or having to replace failed technology. And the internal process, the time for tender, the evaluation process, the consultants, then procurement process, then negotiation, all to fix something that could be mission critical and impacting your customers today. What we advocate is let's do that once. Let's do that through a 5 or a 10-year contract. Let's agree those milestones. Let's track outcomes. Let's have flexibility in that. But let's look at how we can be more proactive so you get away and you get agile provisioning. You're able to do capacity planning for today and the future. And finally, it's about accountability and joint accountability. We look at customer success management. So what do we mean by that? Single point of accountability for all of your power and cooling assets. No hidden costs. It's incumbent on NaviX solutions to manage that environment. That allows operators and organisations to focus on what they're good at and focus on their core business. Now, these 4 benefits resonate very strongly at varying degrees within organisations, but they all drive and look towards a common outcome. Let's talk about cost of ownership, and I mentioned it before. Our traditional business models today are let's budget, let's plan, let's spend a $500K, $1 million, etc. Let's just do our traditional CapEx. It's easy, put a 2-year maintenance contract, etc. Now, why do we need to continue to do that? It fits certain organisations 100%. But when you start to really look at total cost of ownership, and you start to look at manpower productivity gains, you start to look at efficiency that you can get from introducing new technology, right? Cost of working capital when you go out and budget, borrow, or money to do these upgrades. What we've found is when you look at critical power and cooling assets, you can save through an as-a-service model over a 10-year period or even a 5-year period, but in this example 10, at least 10 to 15% savings on that investment. That changes based on organisation, but what we're finding is those variables and the way that we look at the traditional way versus moving towards critical power and cooling as a service, we do still see on average 10, 12, 15% saving for a business. And why is that important? It comes back to what I said before. Instead of spending $500,000 up front on one asset or 2 assets, you're able to do that across your whole estate for power and cooling. So there are other efficiencies that we bring into the model, but everybody that we've worked with to date, everybody that we've modelled total cost of ownership, find there's a transformation that happens for them about how they deploy capital and how they budget for now and in the future. So how do we approach and how do we actually do this? Partnership is key. Whether that's partnering with people in the market that have innovative technology, like we just heard from KoolLogix, or whether that's partnership with the customer or the provider, that's critical for us. So we go through what we term a co-create. Where do we want to start? Do we start with UPS? Do we want to start with cooling? Do we want to start with both? And so we come out, we look at the existing environment, we do an assessment of where you are today, we look at the trends of what's happened in that, and we sit down and we evaluate And then we make informed decisions as we want to put a solution together with you. Do you want to own the asset? Have the asset owned by us in a true life cycle outcome? Do you want to then have part of your operations team do day-to-day and have us do tier 2, tier 3 escalation process, which is seamless? How do you want to get access to unified digital platform as an application to help you be more efficient operationally? And so we go through all of that. We don't just work, even though we're in strategic partner with Schneider Electric, we work with other providers in the market. We will buy back competitive product. We will manage that. So we want to understand the ecosystem and how we can optimize that. As I mentioned, we then look at agile provisioning and capacity planning. We do that together. So refresh cycles are built into the 5 or 10-year contract. So we know when we're going to replace assets. We're doing forward planning and we're understanding what we need. Then what we're doing is saying, let's deploy the best in class that's in market with no heavy upfront capital. We then talk about condition-based analytics. We talk about outcome. We talk about sustainability. How do we align those goals, right, so that we can track and monitor those? We want to be proactive. How do we have proactive alarming maintenance? How do we make sure that we're across the entire life cycle of the asset? So very much co-create, providing flexibility, elasticity, and innovation, not just at a technology layer, but at a commercial, at an application, and at a service level. We believe that differentiates us significantly in the market. We are a first to market, leading this. We think that NaviX Solutions has a value proposition that we can build on and will build on. We're starting the journey with power and cooling. But data center as a service, prefab as a service, all of these are areas that we're building into for the future. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time. I hope you found this informative. And if there's any takeaways, it's about how do you challenge what you do today? There's no harm in talking to NaviX Solutions and understanding, how do I change my traditional CapEx model? How do I bring innovation into my environment? How can I change? How can I accelerate sustainability? It's about partnership, it's about being innovative, and it's about challenging the way that we've done things in data centers for many years. So with that, I wish you all a great evening or afternoon, depending where you are. Thank you very, very much for your time, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that presentation. Presentation 4, ladies and gentlemen, for this afternoon right here in Singapore will be on gas and liquid, a cooling engineer's view. Now, presenting this is the Director and Professional Engineer Mechanical, TW International Counsel Private Limited. Please welcome on stage in Singapore right here for you in the virtual world. He's coming up, Mr. Derek William.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. I'd like to start with the good news. The good news is I'm not here to sell you anything. A friend of mine asked, can you come along and do a speech? I said, do I have to keep my mask on? No? Okay, I'm good with that. So what do you want me to talk about? What would you like me to talk about? Well, make something up. Okay, so I made something up. So we're here to talk about supercomputers. So I thought, okay, what can I say about supercomputers? So I want to ask you the question, what do supercomputers do? And over these last few days, you've been talking about all kinds of things that they do. So probably in your mind is all those good things that they can do. Useful work. Okay, most of you will be answering that question with things that supercomputers do as useful work. There are a couple of other perspectives that you might think about. An electrical engineer will say, well, what do supercomputers do? They consume a lot of electricity. Electrical energy going in. So we need big power supplies. I'm a mechanical engineer. That means my job is all about cooling, air conditioning. So my answer is, what do supercomputers do? Well, we've got all that energy going in. By the first law of thermodynamics, we've got energy going out as well, and that comes out as heat. So for a cooling engineer's perspective, this is what supercomputers are doing. There's a lot of heat coming out. What are we going to do about that? How do we deal with that? So over the years, we've developed many different kinds of systems for getting rid of that heat out from the data centers. So we've got a typical traditional system shown on screen now, whereby we've got aircon units moving air around the data center. They're connected by pipework to a chiller. The chiller's connected by pipework to a cooling tower, and the cooling tower gets rid of the heat to the outdoors. Well, we could replace the cooling tower with seawater or some other way of getting rid of the heat. But one way or another, we're moving the heat from inside to outside of the data center. That's my job. That's what I have to do. Otherwise, your computers are going to overheat. And if they overheat, they don't work very well. And in fact, they may stop working. So traditionally, how have we done that? Let's look a bit closer at the internal part of that, looking more closely at what's happening in the IT equipment. So we're moving a whole lot of air around the data center. And this is the thing that we're really trying to keep cool, isn't it? The heart of the IT equipment. We've got to get the heat out from the chip. And how have we been doing that? Okay, we blow cold air over the chip. That air's got to be quite cold, and we just blow the air over. We can't get a lot of heat transfer. So how has that been improved over the years? We added heat sinks, all kinds of different shapes and sizes of heat sinks to make it effective to get the heat out from the chip into the air. No matter how hard we try at designing our heat sinks, we still need quite a big temperature difference between the chip surface and the air in order to get the heat transferred out from the chip. So typically, perhaps we might be looking at a temperature difference of maybe 50 degrees. Now, every IT equipment has different characteristics, so don't worry about the precise numbers. I'm sure you all have different numbers, but the point is, you have to have a very big temperature difference. So because of this kind of thing, on a lot of data centers, we're looking at maybe 25 degrees air has to be blown across this thing to make it work. All right, is there a better way? We can't keep doing that. Why does that not work so well? It's because air is a good insulator. Anybody who's been on a skiing holiday and worn the puffy jacket, which is quite lightweight, how does it keep you warm? Because it's pockets of air. Air is a good insulator. So why are we using it to try to get the heat out from the chip? There has to be a better way. Okay. Just to demonstrate in numbers, air is a good insulator, we can look at our fundamentals. Look at the basic equation. Q equals mCp delta T. Okay, what are those numbers? I'll expand that out slightly. So V being the volume flow rate, Q being the heat flow. So heat flow is either cooling or heating. That heat flow is fluid volume flow times a constant. So those two middle portions are the density and the specific heat. We take those as approximately constant. They don't change much. Okay, so we've got the fluid volume times a constant times a change in temperature. So if we're working to a particular temperature, if we want more heat flow, so more cooling, more movement of the heat, we need more volume flow. Okay, so let's look at air as that fluid. Air, its density is 1.185 kilograms per cubic meter. Its specific heat, 1.006, which translates to a relatively constant factor of 1.19. Basic physics. You cannot change the laws of physics. That's as good as we can get from air. What if we used water instead? A liquid instead of a gas? It's not so good at insulating against the heat transfer, is it? It has a density of 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter. It has a specific heat of 4.186, which translates into a much bigger constant. So you can see this is 3,500 times better at moving heat than air is. It's going to do a better job at moving heat. That's clear. On the other hand, maybe you don't want to bring water into the servers. So let's just look at a typical refrigerant, say R134A, for example. I've got a density there and a specific heat there. You might come up with different numbers at different temperatures, different pressures, those numbers change. But let's just take those as examples. Don't get hung up on the exact numbers. Just look at the principle. We're looking at 1,500 times better at moving the heat because air is a good insulator. Okay, so let's look at that in practice, putting liquid across the chip to take away the heat. Once we use a liquid instead of a gas, okay, to get our 75 degrees chip surface temperature, we don't have to have the liquid so cold. It doesn't need to be 25 degrees anymore. In fact, if we used 40 degrees liquid, the heat exchange is so much better that in fact, our chip surface becomes cooler. So actually we get an advantage doing this where the heat transfer is so much better, the chip is kept cooler, which means the processing is done better. You have better performance on your processors. So this is the fundamental idea behind liquid cooling. And we're moving the heat from the chip to, what are we moving it to? So here's an example. Is this a liquid-cooled server? It's got liquid pipes running around inside it, so it looks good. But actually, no, this is not what we mean by liquid cooling, because this particular equipment still requires an airflow through the equipment to take away the heat. So this is not what we really mean by liquid-cooled server. Okay. How could we actually take away the heat from the chip and take it completely outside of the data center, okay, without using airflow, without using that insulator? There's a few ways we could do that. We could use immersion-style liquid cooling. So we could put the servers, the IT equipment, into a bathtub full of some liquid. That's immersion. We could replace the heatsink with a different kind of heatsink which has a liquid flowing through it to more effectively take away the heat. We could actually have a server that is designed to have liquid flowing through it. In this case, it's actually water flowing through that server, and that's nothing new, that's old. In fact, how old are liquid-cooled servers? Very old, 1950s, 1960s. This is nothing new, okay? And supercomputer people have known this for ages. All of those fastest supercomputers that you see on the top list, they're all liquid-cooled, because that's the only way you can get that much heat out from the processors. It's nothing new. Okay, so let me go to the diagram of getting the heat out all the way to the outside. So again, it's nothing new. ASHRAE have had this diagram in a document they issued in 2011. And in fact, of course, they were working on that document long before then. So they already came out with a standard way back then, which shows some steps that you might go through to move the heat from the IT equipment using fluids, using liquids, all the way to the outside. Okay, in this diagram, they've got a chiller still there. But when you think about it, if you're looking at a 65 degrees chip temperature, for example, and you could use 40 degrees liquid to take that heat away, do we really need the chiller? We shouldn't need the chiller, because at that kind of temperature, we should be able to go directly to the cooling tower. Okay? We also don't necessarily need so many steps of heat exchange. We can reduce the number of steps. So Ashray gave you a diagram that was kind of cover everything. I'm going to give you a simplified diagram which makes it a bit more straightforward. Okay? I've still got 2 heat exchangers there. You could reduce it to only 1 heat exchanger if you want. That CDU, coolant distribution unit, that doesn't have to be a box in the room. It could be something outside the room. It could be something in the cabinet. It could be something underneath the cabinet or above the cabinet. Okay? There's many different ways you could do it. So just look at the process. We're basically passing a fluid through the IT equipment, picking up the heat, and we're transferring it through a couple of steps to outside, and we don't need a chiller. We don't need a compressor. All we need to do is move that fluid around. So this kind of thing, if we want 40 degrees on the internal part, we could be doing 34 at the secondary loop. We can get 32 degrees from a cooling tower all year round in Singapore, and we call that free cooling. So if we're doing liquid cooling, this is the kind of thing we ought to be looking at. Okay, so let's go to a practical example. I was so happy one fine day, one of my clients came to me, we're looking at installing a supercomputer. Great. Gold, the gold version of the supercomputer should be the most fantastic one, right? And it's liquid cooled, good. Look at the front cover of the manual, liquid cooled, very good. Sure enough, yes, we've got a water supply going into the IT equipment cabinets at 16 degrees. Hold on a moment, 16 degrees? This is a liquid-cooled server, right? Oh yes. Liquid-cooled supercomputer gold version. Water return temperature at 20 degrees. Why does it need to be so cold? So look a little bit further at the manual and we see words like cabinet air temperature set point 21 degrees. I'm starting to get suspicious. Why are we talking about air temperature? This is a liquid-cooled server. Okay, let's look a little further through the documentation and we find there are blowers that force air horizontally through the compute cabinet. Sounds impressive. And we've got a cooling water coil that transfers heat from the cabinet to the facility. All right, so just like our gaming machine, which has a liquid-cooled chip, but actually requires airflow through our gaming machine, this has turned out to be similar. So actually, the heat transfer is still using that good insulator called air. So is this really a liquid-cooled supercomputer? I'll leave you guys to decide. I'll move on to another topic that is related to this liquid cooling. The difference between single phase or two phase. So far what I've drawn on the diagrams, you might take it as single phase. That means the liquid stays as a liquid. Two phase would mean the liquid actually changes to a gas somewhere in the system. Why would we be interested in changing it from a liquid to gas? It's because the change in phase between liquid and gas involves an even greater heat flow than what we had before. So going back to our fundamental equations and just using R134A at a particular temperature and pressure, just taking some example number, just for illustration. We had this equation. Let me reverse it out because now we need to talk about the mass flow, not the volume flow. So we can have that equation such that the heat flow is the mass flow times 1.425 times the change in temperature. All right, so if we use a change in temperature of our refrigerant of 10 degrees, then our heat flow is the mass flow times 14. Okay, what if we did a change of phase? So go to two-phase. What happens if we evaporate that liquid? How much heat flow can we get? At particular, of course, again, the numbers will change depending on the temperature and pressure and what liquid you use. But in this case, I've got an equivalent number, which is the latent heat of vaporization of 178. 178 versus 14. You can see why a change in phase can take away even more heat. So let's try to make use of that. Okay. There are practical difficulties because a change in phase involves evaporation, perhaps boiling, which can happen in a random manner, and it's something that might cause problems if it was applied directly to your motherboards. How could we do it? We could do it as a replaced heatsink, where the boiling goes on inside that special heatsink. That's a possibility. So I'm not looking at telling you to use a particular product or a particular way of doing things. My job is to open up your thinking. If I've done that, you can think of different ways to apply these basic principles. All right, so if I have a two-phase refrigerant, this is what my improved cycle will look like in terms of moving the heat from the IT equipment all the way outdoors with no compressor, no chiller, free cooling. Okay. Obviously, we've got pumps to pump those liquids around, but those use a lot less energy than compressors do. So yes, there's no such thing as free cooling. You still have to pay for some fans and some, on the cooling tower that is, and some pumps, but it's much, much less. Okay. If we want to get our PUEs down, this is the kind of thing we look at. Let's take that one step further, the holy grail of data center air conditioning. Instead of throwing away that heat to the cooling tower or wherever else you throw away the heat to, let's reuse it. That's the holy grail, and that's a thing that many people are thinking about. We haven't got a perfect solution yet, and that's what we want to work towards. So that would be our optimal system there, something like that. Okay. Is this going to happen overnight? No, of course not. It's not like everybody's going to change from air-cooled servers to liquid-cooled servers overnight. What we expect to see is the liquid-cooled servers becoming a higher percentage, bit by bit. So as that happens, there will be less air-cooled servers, but for the foreseeable future, air-cooled servers are not going to go away. So what it will be is a change in the percentage. So what we want to see from new data center designs is the flexibility to implement this. When customers want to change from air-cooled to liquid-cooled, is your data center ready? In the meantime, what can we do to improve? If we still have to work with air-cooled servers, obviously, what would we do to improve? Bring the cooling as close as we can to the IT cabinets, as close as we can to the load, and see if we can make use of this two-phase thing. So we saw an example of that earlier with the KoolLogix. That's one example. So those are the basic principles. So that's what I wanted to do today, just recap on the basic principles and leave you guys to come up with the best solutions that actually make this work. So thank you very much, and have a good evening and rest of the week.
Thank you kindly, Derek. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we've come to the end of the sessions right here in the main hall. The other track sessions are still going on in the other halls in this level of Suntec. We will be having a closing scheduled exactly 45 minutes from now at 6:30 p.m. right here in the main hall. For those of you still here in presence, we'd like to invite you to come back here for that closing. Otherwise, our virtual audience, you may want to jump onto the other tracks that are still going on right now and be back with us for the closing of SCA 2022 scheduled at 18:30 Singapore time or 6:30 p.m. Singapore time. We'll see you soon. Thank you.